He was working in the World Trade Center. He was working on the 105th floor. I was working on the 77th floor. And we went into work together like we did every day. And I got down to the train depot, and the first train we took, and I said to him, Todd, why don't we take the ferry over the Hudson? And he said, no, I'm going to take the train. I said, Todd, it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful Tuesday. Come with Daddy, you know, we'll take. No. It's too cold. He just was lazy, I said to him. He didn't want to take the ferry because it's a little longer walk. But in any event, I said to him, have a great day, sweetheart.
Christopher saw the world in a very simple way, and he wanted to be a firefighter from the time he was a little boy. Al was in the fire department for over 40 years, and I know that had something to do with it. He was the spark in our family.
My son used to, you know, he was only on the job for a short time, and he would constantly say, oh, we didn't catch any work yet, we haven't had a good job. And I said, you know, relax, you'll get some work, don't worry.
I was a firefighter detailed into the mayor's office of emergency management. So basically, I wasn't really wearing the helmet anymore, I was wearing a tie. And helping represent the Mayor Giuliani at the scene of major emergencies in New York City. Everybody remembers how beautiful the day was. Beautiful fall day, and just spectacular. And I went to work at 7 World Trade Center, which was my office, just like a normal day, and I was having breakfast around 8 a.m., 8:30 in our cafeteria, and I was just sitting there reading the paper.
I was 19 years old. I was at George Washington University. I was a student and had an early morning class, so I was in our political science building at GW, and for people that don't know, it's right in the middle of the city. It's actually right next to the State Department and just across the bridge from the Pentagon. On September 10th, 2001, I started interning at the Department of Justice, so in their public affairs. So Ashcroft was the Attorney General.
I was destined for Milwaukee, Wisconsin, again dispatched by the President, as other cabinet members were, to be reading with students that day.
I basically worked for NYPD Emergency Service Unit. We did heavy rescue and SWAT. We came in, we got our equipment for the day, our assignments for the day. I was doing a sector in Queens. We were going to get ready to get something to eat.
That day I was taking my daughter to the bus stop to pick up the bus to go to school. She was in middle school at the time.
I remember sitting in a 3-seater behind my bus driver and saying to myself, today feels like this is going to be a day I'm never ever going to forget. And I didn't understand why I felt that.
For me, it was my first day of retirement. I had decided to retire in July of 2001, and this was the first day of school. So it was my first day of real retirement, and I expected the day to play out very differently.
Good morning, America. I'm Charles Gibson.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
Former presidential candidate Elizabeth Dole is ready to hit the campaign trail.
I can tell you what's the news down here in Washington, and it is Michael Jordan, probably the news all over the nation.
Take a look at the highlights for today. New York City, beautiful day here, 80 degrees today.
It is beautiful outside, perfect September day with lots of sunshine.
It is lunchtime in London, 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, and 8 a.m. here in New York, live from the CNN Financial News headquarters.
Nice as it could be across the Northeast. Rough seas still from the chop from that hurricane, but other than that, it's kind of quiet around the country. We like quiet. It's quiet. It's too quiet.
At about 8:46 on that morning, I was in my office, I was on the phone, and the building shook, boom! And it moved, and the glass case in my office exploded.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that.
I remember the lights went out. And this is a newer high-rise building, so for the power to go out is pretty unusual. So it went out, and 7 seconds later it just came back on. And I knew from my experience that meant that we lost a feeder cable. Something major happened. We lost a feeder cable, and the power came back on through another feeder cable. So I knew something fairly serious had occurred. And then the people that were sitting on the windows that looked at Tower 1 all got up and started running, screaming toward me.
And the radio started going off that a plane had crashed into one of the towers downtown.
This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Clearly something relatively devastating happening this morning there on the south end of the island of Manhattan. That is, once again, a picture of one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
Cynthia ran into my office, one of the women that works there. Mr. Owita, what are we going to do? We were fortunate, not that many people were there yet. It was before 9 o'clock. And I said, Cynthia, follow me. Now, the World Trade Center at that time, if you know it, it was broken up into express and local floors, just like any building. But they called them sky lobbies. There was the first floor when you walked in, then there was the 44th floor, which was the first sky lobby, and then there was the 78th floor, which is the second sky lobby. Those were express. You can go right to 78, you can go right to 44. I had been in the building on February 26, 1993, when the truck exploded. So when this happened, I knew, leave. Don't hesitate, leave. Unfortunately, many people didn't follow that advice.
Were there any people hurt, do you know?
Ran, and everyone in the pass train just ran. I don't know if anyone was hurt, but I assume they were because the windows were all blown out.
I ran upstairs to the 23rd floor where my office was, which was also the Emergency Operations Center for the City of New York. I wanted to ensure that the other units in our office were getting the help they needed, making sure their supervisors were on deck, because we had practiced and drilled for, hundreds of times for major things like this.
We started racing down that way because we're a citywide unit, and when something big happens, they usually need everybody from each borough to come. So me and my partner, we jumped in the truck, we raced down the Bell Parkway, and as we were going down there, you can see the smoke coming from the tower. It was a bad sight. It was a really bad sight. So I just figured this is just another plane crash, pilot error. So we started racing down, the traffic started backing up, and we were going up on the grass and around cars and over cars.
I started to leave and I said, maybe I could go up to the 78th floor, get an express elevator out of here. But I went up to the 78th floor and I saw the smoke was coming out of the elevators, and fire. And everybody was on the other side of the building. So I said, I'll go to the other side of the building. And that saved me.
It was my job to be the supervisor of field operations. So I had about 15 first responders that worked for me, police officers, firefighters, sanitation, health, all from all different city agencies. So our job was to go to the emergency and to assist the incident commander on behalf of the mayor, make sure the incident commander was getting all the resources that he needed. In this case, it was the fire chief. I grabbed my helmet and my mayor's office jacket, put it on, and went over to where Tower 1 was, and there was debris crashing to the ground. There were bodies crashing to the ground. It was difficult for me to see how bad it was, because it was, it was 110 stories up, so you really had to crane your neck. You're looking straight up, and the perspective is off. You can't really tell. So I still wasn't sure how bad it was, although I knew it was bad and getting worse.
Because it takes you at least an hour to get down, because you have to know everybody's coming out of the stairs. As you're going down the stairs, more and more people are coming. So, at any rate, I'm walking down the stairs, and I'm shaking. My feet are shaking, and I'm scared. The woman next to me is crying, we're going to die. I said, no, we're going to live. We're going to live. And then I'm walking down the stairs. And this time, unlike the last time, the lights stayed on. The first time they weren't ready for this kind of thing. This time they were ready. The lights stayed on.
I went into that plaza level of Tower 1, and there were escalators going down to the ground level. That's where the fire command station was. And one of the things that struck me the most is I got this feeling of everything's going to be okay, no matter how bad it is. And the thing that I saw that made me feel that way was that for every person who had a hard time getting out of the building quickly, there were 4 or 5 regular civilians, office workers, who were helping that person. And I said, that is the human spirit. That is the American spirit. We've already, as a country, come together in this moment. Even before the second plane came in. And it kind of buoyed me a little bit, which was rare on that day. I went down the escalator, and it was the elevator lobby that I was kind of going down to. And all the firemen were there. About 30 or 40 firemen were there. And they were awaiting assignment from the chief. You know, where did the chief want them to go? In that sea of firefighters were several of my friends, including my best friend, Captain Terry Hatton, captain of Rescue 1. And he was a big tall guy. He was 6'4". With his helmet and his boots on, he was 6'7", or, you know, he was just a big guy. And so he saw me over the top of the other guys, and he yelled, "T, come here!" And he gave me the nod of his head, and I went over to him, and he had his Halligan bar in his hand, the pry bar, and he wrapped his big arms around me like this and squeezed me tight, and he put his mouth right up here on my cheek, and he said, "I love you, brother. I may never see you again." And I kind of laughed it off, but he knew what he was talking about. He was one of those guys that was always 8 steps ahead of everyone, 10 steps ahead. His mind just worked like that. And he understood that when he went in that stairwell, it would probably be one of the last acts of his life.
And we're going down, and I get down after about 30 flights, and I see the firemen coming up. And I hold on to the fireman. Save the people. Save my son. He's up there. But they're going up to save the people, and they're going to their death.
Rescue 1, the elite special operations company of Manhattan, one of only 5 in New York City, the best of the best, made it to the 83rd floor of Tower 1. We know for a fact from eye and ear witnesses that they made it to the 83rd floor. They were saving people's lives. They were fighting the fire when an interior localized collapse occurred and trapped them. While I was also in the lobby, among that sea of firefighters, I saw Christopher Blackwell, firefighter in Rescue 3, who I worked with for 7 years, a very good friend of mine. And he said to me, "This isn't good." I said, "No, Chris, be careful." Chris never came back.
We got into the Bell Parkway by the Battery Tunnel, going into Manhattan.
Now our apartment faces Manhattan, and we saw the Twin Towers from our window. So we went to the window, and of course the first tower had been already hit, and we just stared, you know. Initially, you know, your first thought was something must have happened to him for him not to have seen this building. This is the biggest building, and you see this building for miles. So your first thing was that the pilot either had a stroke, a heart attack, or something had happened.
It appears that there is more and more fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building. And as fire crews are descending on this area, it does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my...
That looks like a second plane. So this looks like it is some sort of a concerted effort to attack the World Trade Center that is underway in downtown New York.
Because at 9:02, we hear boom again, and it's the other building.
As we got there, we saw another big giant flash, and we were like, uh-oh, this is not an accident here anymore.
And as we were watching out the window, we saw the second plane come around and hit the side of the building.
We actually saw it practically make a U-turn and go into the South Tower. We knew that something was wrong, something was up. We were under attack or something, but at that point we didn't know what was going on.
You know, you want to believe you're going to live. They say, what is it? What was that sound? And somebody says, oh, it was lightning and thunder. I says, lightning and thunder? It was a beautiful day, man. The weather changed in 15 minutes. But I said, we wanted to believe it.
Literally, the voice barked out of the cockpit saying, General Ashcroft, call the command center. Now, that could mean any number of things. It certainly didn't register with me at the time that I was going to be informed of this massive assault on America and her institutions. But I picked up the phone. The command center began to relate to me the details which were unfolding at the time.
And finally someone had mentioned that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, but you know, you kind of think, okay, small plane, accident, that's sad, it's bad, but this is not going to change the entire day. And so then we're just waiting for class to start, and you just look at your watch, you're looking and say, okay, this is bizarre. And finally, a maintenance person, actually from the building, walked into the classroom and said, you guys need to get out of here, we're shutting down the school.
Well, immediately I said to the pilot, turn the plane around, we're going back to Washington. We've got to begin to remediate this situation. And he said, I can't turn the plane around. We don't have enough fuel to get back to Washington. So we were initiating our descent, crossing Lake Michigan by this time, going into Milwaukee. And we went ahead and landed in Milwaukee, refueled the airplane.
I saw the image of a plane crash in, obviously. It looked obvious to me. This was not, by the time I had gotten back to my actual apartment, I knew this was not an accident.
Well, we're surrounded by a group of SWAT teams with automatic weaponry. There's this great uncertainty about what might happen next. We run into the fixed base operator, the quote airplane gas stations that are on every airport, and we look at the television sets and we begin to see what we had heard about.
So we got through the tunnel, and as we got on the other side of the tunnel, we started getting rained on by debris and paper. A piece of metal hit our truck, and it was very hard to comprehend everything that was going on.
I think I had some of the sort of adrenaline sweep and that you have when you're attacked. And there was a surge within me said, get back to address these problems.
I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Pace and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
It was in this time frame that we had the awareness of the Pentagon being the point of another attack.
We now have fire confirmed at the Pentagon. We want to hold our breath here, it just seems to me, for a second, and not get into a mode that the country is under attack. But we now have 2 attacks on the Twin Trade Tower Center. U.S. buildings, city buildings completely evacuated in New York City. We have this mysterious black smoke at the southwest corner of the White House, which is to say there's something going on behind the old executive office building. We now have a report that fire has been confirmed at the Pentagon.
The White House West Wing has been evacuated, as we understand. We know that President Bush is not there, but he is on his way back to Washington. You can see the armed guards on top of the White House keeping watch. But at this point, They, as well as we, don't know exactly what's going to happen, but everyone is on standby, as you might expect.
So I turned on the TV, and they're talking about the Pentagon, and I'm on the 6th floor, right, not too far away from the bridge that goes across to the Pentagon, Key Bridge and 14th Street Bridge. So I go out, and I can see it from my porch. I can see the smoke rising from my building. So what I see on TV is, of course, the gaping big hole.
And so it was sort of like hearing the gunshots and having the sense that you needed to run toward the battle and do what you could. In some respects, we countered the advice, rather direct and strong advice.
And my first thought was, this is gonna be serious. We're gonna lose some guys today. And that was my first thought. Never in my wildest expectations that any kind of a number that appeared would be, but I thought maybe we would lose 1 or 2 guys, because of this tremendously large complex. I knew the complex very well. I knew the buildings. Where do you start? Now you've got 2 buildings that are on fire, and where do you absolutely start?
So we threw the truck down the block. We grabbed all the equipment, and we started hearing our bosses screaming for the military. We figured at that time, worst dream came true, that we got attacked again. And we got our equipment, we ran down the West Street, and we were gonna go in to the North Tower. But our boss was splitting the teams up into SWAT for heavy weapons, and half was gonna go rescue, that was going to follow the other guys that were already in the towers. The guys that worked in Manhattan were already in the towers at the time. So as we were waiting there, I just remember thinking, how are they going to put this fire out? I saw hundreds of fire trucks. I'm looking up, and there's a hole in the South Tower that was like shaped like a wing of a plane.
It took me 1 hour to get down the stairs. But I got out about 9:46, 12 minutes before the other building fell. And I'm thinking, well, Todd's gonna make it. I mean, he's only 28 flights above me, and he's got at least a half hour extra, and he's faster than me, so he's gonna be all right. So I go up to Broadway, and a young man sees me, and he sees me crying and carrying on, and he says to me, I'll stay with you. I'll stay with you. And everybody was kind of kind. I said, but I want to call my wife. I want to let her know I'm all right, and Todd's coming down. The phones don't work. Nothing works. Everybody's standing at the street. They're looking for the telephones. There's no communication.
So after a while, my boss didn't show up because he was organizing other rescue teams. So we're standing there, and I'm looking up, I'm like, this is gonna be a really long day. So I went to fix my harness. I had a Laracus on, and I dropped my Scott pack and my harness to the ground to fix all my belts and everything. And just taking a breather, and I'm looking up, and I see what I think the building is coming down.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Report to us exactly what is transpiring in the area of Lower Manhattan.
Everything is happening, and your mind really can't process it. And we just stood there for a second, and then we just bolted. I think my body just took over, and we ran down West Street, and then the building came down. We had gotten knocked down and buried in kind of soot. And I didn't know at the time what it was. It was hot. The dust was hot. It was down my back. It was all over the place. As we were running, one of the guys fell, and we went to pick him up. We turned to pick him up. He was a big guy, and I remember swallowing everything and choking and couldn't breathe. And I just remember saying to myself, wow, this is how I'm gonna die.
You get out on the street, your phone doesn't work, so your family is trying to call you. It was like out of a movie. I mean, it was like all the cars were stopped because people were trying to get out of the city. and it was kind of like the World War II or even movies where everyone was like leaning into cars to listen to radios because your cell phones didn't work, and if you weren't by a TV, you didn't even know exactly the scope of what had happened.
So I walk with this man, and then I get about a mile, I don't know how far, and I said to him, I'm going to try to get a taxi. I'm going to go to my daughter's house. I was there like in minutes. She lived on, I don't know, somewhere in the 80s. I forget the exact street. So I go to her building, and I get in, and they say to me, the World Trade Center collapsed. I said, what do you mean the World Trade Center collapsed? She's not there, her friend's there. She's out. She went to church to pray. God saved Todd. Save my father.
From my apartment, I could see the Pentagon smoking. And then I finally saw the imagery on television. It was just, you knew from that point on, things were going to really change for your life, especially as a college student in Washington, D.C.
The phone rang. It was my mother. She said, look on the TV. Something's happening at the World Trade Center.
I remember going to my school, being in math class, when the guidance counselor came in and told us, all of us, that the World Trade Center had been hit and had collapsed. And at that point, my first thought was my aunt.
It's just I had a knot in my stomach because I knew my sister was working there. And then my mother said, we cannot speak to Arlene. Arlene's not answering her phone. So for me, I guess inwardly, I felt she was gone. I don't know why, but I just felt it. Because Arlene was in the 1993 one also, and she got home that day with all the debris on her and so forth. It was very devastating. I mean, it was like not real. I mean, even watching the images on TV, it was almost like of a horror movie, like they show you on TV. Seeing these people running and I mean, my heart went down to my feet that day.
It was a very difficult time, but I had also at the same time a sense of calmness and a peace. And I knew that for me, because I said a prayer for me, I believe in Lord Jesus very strongly. So for me, I said a prayer, and once I said that prayer, I had a beautiful calmness come over me, and that's what kept me, in a sense, sane at the age of 13 years old.
My phone did not stop ringing. I had people from the town calling me. Do you know your sister's in the World Trade Center? What happened to her? Did anybody call you? Do you know, did she get out? Well, no, we knew something went wrong, but we didn't know the extent of it until we started hearing the truth. What had happened was, I know the story because another person told me, she had walked out of the building, and as they were walking out, it collapsed on them. Because one person we know survived. She was the one who came out and told us. And I mean, that was it. I can visualize it now, just thinking of where they were. I know the area because I used to work down here. And it's like I can actually see what happened to her. It's terrible. And I know the other person that was with her that was friends, they died together.
They told me that it appeared that this was not accidental, that there was a lot of uncertainty, and that there were other things that were still unfolding. I turned to the individuals in the plane with me, and I said, the world will never be the same. We knew we were under attack. We knew this wasn't, we didn't have the feeling that this was an attack of a foreign power. I think that was pretty early resolved that this was, but we didn't know how many other planes in the air. We hadn't inventoried passenger lists. We didn't know where passengers had come from. We didn't know what other planes with heavy fuel loads or just as a heavy instrument of destruction themselves might be targeting a variety of other targets. It was clear to us that there was a multiple target strategy. There were, 4 airplanes that had already been clearly involved. We didn't know how many other airplanes there might be. We had planes that were coming from overseas that had passed the point of no return. They couldn't be turned back, and we needed to make arrangements to get them down.
There were all these planes all around the country headed towards different targets. We know that there were planes trying to get to Washington, D.C. to take a Capitol or the White House. So you didn't know it was over yet. We kind of take that for granted now, that the spots we knew were New York, D.C., and then the plane crashes in Pennsylvania that was on the way to D.C. It was on the way to another target. And we kind of take for granted that was it.
An airplane as a weapon is reduced substantially in terms of risk when it goes to the ground. So our Canadian friends were excellent allies at this time. They received a lot of planes that landed. We had planes coming both across the Atlantic and the Pacific. So there was a lot of uncertainty. We were trying to figure out what the common denominators were between these planes. I think by the end of the day we had some pretty good conclusions, and they turned out to have been right. We found what we thought were related passengers and different methods of operations. Part of the awareness we had of the way they operated came from reports of these planes that were in distress. Ted Olson's wife, Barbara Olson, called a couple of times prior to the time when she lost her life in the crash at the Pentagon. Right. Ted Olson, having been the Solicitor General of the United States, a Justice Department employee, and Barbara, a well-known author, a political commentator in our culture.
She was one of the few that was able to get a call off to let him know what they thought was going on. And just imagine that. I mean, you can't imagine that. Getting that phone call and then seeing that image, and for the rest of his life, having to see that image. And I remember seeing him a few days later back at the office at Department of Justice working. So that is one thing that's great about America, is that as bad as it was, and as much as people were very nervous around the entire country and scared, that the government doesn't stop working, that democracy, the republic still works.
There were things that pieced together, and when you had those kinds of bits of information, you looked for commonalities on other flights where other people of similar disposition might have been passengers, and we were able to, the FBI was very successful in doing that very quickly.
Because as we were standing there, we were trying to get everybody together, the other building came down. I don't remember any part of that. I think my brain just froze at that time, fried, whatever. I don't remember that. I remember going back to find everybody again, and they did what they call a reverse roll call. Okay, what they do is central call all the names of the guys in the unit. And when you hear your name, you say here, so this way they know who's accounted for and who's not accounted for. And as they were going through the roll call, 14 names never answered. So it was like, okay, let's get our bearings and find these guys.
At the very beginning, I just expected Christopher to come home. I didn't expect, he had worked the night before. We expected him to be home. We got a call around 9:15 asking that he return to work, and that's how we knew he was down here. But it never occurred to me that he might be dead. Never. I just, I kept watching this horror story unfold on the news and the TV, and as I say, we had the window. I just stood at the window for hours watching, and then of course we saw both buildings collapse. And Al put his hands over his face and said, "Oh my God, it's a pancake collapse," and I didn't know what he was talking about. But I knew that was serious, because firemen never react to anything horrific. I couldn't even ask him what that meant. I didn't realize that meant that there would be few people who were surviving. But again, my son was going to come home. It took me until November 2nd to process the fact that my 23-year-old son might be dead. We found out later that his engine company was in the Marriott Hotel. We were told that they were on the 23rd floor. Their job was to evacuate everybody from the Marriott Hotel. The ladder company had been assigned to the elevator in building number 2. And that's where all of those bodies were found just before the close of the site. They found all the guys from the ladder company compressed together in the elevator shaft.
343 firemen die on that day. More firemen die on that day than in the history of the New York City Fire Department. 37 Port Authority police die. And almost 3,000 people. I believe Todd's out. I tell my wife, I call her, I said, "Honey, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to bring Todd home. I'll be home tomorrow. I'm going to wait till he's going to call us. He'll call you. Let's just find out where he is." And then we're thinking maybe, like everybody else, we bring his picture. We got his picture. We go to the hospitals. We go riding around, putting them up on posters. Anybody seen Todd? But it wasn't. Everybody was doing it. Everybody was doing it. Because we figured maybe they lost their memory, or somehow they couldn't, you know, it was temporarily, they weren't in their full capacity. But then I go home to my wife with my daughter Amy the next day, and they tell me, no, there's nobody saved. I said, that's not true. They said, Papa, Daddy, look at it. There's no way he got out.
I feel lucky that I was able to say goodbye to at least a few of my friends. I lost 93 friends that day. 100 guys from firefighters from special operations were killed that day. So out of the 343 firefighters, 1/3 of them were the very best, the very bravest, the most experienced firefighters probably in the world. From Chief Ray Downey all the way down to the newest firefighter in special operations. They were all killed because their job was to be in the most dangerous spot, and they were.
We worked until probably about 1 o'clock in the morning that day. We didn't find anything. Everything was still a mess. The place was still on fire. We went home. I went home for like maybe 2 hours, got back at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we started the next day digging and crawling, and bucket brigades of thousands of cops and firemen, construction workers. It was so hot and so dusty, you couldn't see anything you were doing. Your feet were burning on the metal.
So as I kind of worked my way towards the site, you know, coming up the hill up to Broadway, and kind of a slight incline, and I was just stunned by the magnitude of the size of the destruction. I just stood there next to Trinity Church, and normally you couldn't see across into New Jersey, and now there was nothing in your way. I mean, the buildings were gone. It was just a sight that would be hard to describe.
The construction companies got there and they brought tons of tools. I remember a lot of the corporations, by that I mean Models came with tractor trailer loads of socks and t-shirts, and Home Depot with buckets and shovels, and they just dumped everything. We were just taking everything and using it, and as we moved on we would leave the tools, and the fire department would come and they would use some of the stuff and they would use it.
And then the pain, because the police come to my house. We found remains of Todd. They checked it out. What do you want us to do? I said, I want them. Bring them to the funeral home. 4 times they came. They were decent. Then one time, I'm home and I get a call, we found Todd's wallet. So I get in my car. I'm in New Jersey where I live, and I race down. I'm like, I'm going to get Todd. It was like crazy. I don't know why it was wrong with me. But I thought maybe they, you're just out of your whack. No, we didn't find Todd. They found his wallet. So 19 days after the tragedy, we decide we're going to hold a memorial service for Todd. There's no more denying. He's not coming back. He's only 25 years old.
It's very, very hard sometimes, because I visualize it almost every night, and if I hear a plane or something goes by, I'm thinking, oh Lord, please just protect us all. We don't want no more devastation. And I know I'm not the only one. A lot of people feel that way.
Well, he looked in my direction at one moment and he said, never let this happen again. That's pretty clear. It wasn't sort of, hey boys, we ought to give this a good try. We ought to do our best. It was just, clarity is an important aspect of leadership, and it said, just don't let this happen again.
Washington, D.C. was like, it was a militarized zone. It was kind of like martial law. I mean, so I looked down from my apartment 2 days before, it would have just been a normal street, Washington Circle, the Metro, a lot of young people on their way to work. Now it's Humvees parked on the sidewalk with anti-aircraft missiles pointed to the sky. Guys walking around with machine guns.
Within a week, probably less than a week, I was working with LA cops. I was working with Canadian cops. Miami Dade came in to work the police sectors. The volunteers from Long Island and all the counties came in. They did the firehouses, okay? The Red Cross came with people from Nashville, okay, Alabama. I remember New Mexico, and there was probably 100 more cities that came here and fed us in those tents that they put up so we could eat. I think this country came together, and I was never so proud of it, and I was at that time.
Why did 9/11 have to bring all of us together like this? It should have been together without this devastation, but this was something that taught us we can, as human beings, live with one another, and we can help one another.
DC is probably the most partisan place in the United States. People, everyone there in that group who's there for that reason has a political, not only has a political opinion, but is getting paid based on their political opinion. That was gone, for a while, in a good way.
In the days and weeks following September 11th, bumper stickers started appearing on firefighters in New York on their cars that said, "On earth and in heaven, still the greatest job in the world, FDNY." And this was the pride and spirit of guys that had just lost a lot and were going to 3 or 4 funerals a day. True story. And when they weren't going to the funerals or memorial services, they were on the pile still trying to find if anyone was still alive there. Those are the greatest heroes I've ever met. People say that we've forgotten September 11th, that America has forgotten September 11th, and I disagree with that. I think that it's probably not in the forefront of everyone's everyday activities, like it is for me and for the families, but for most of America, it's probably not. And that's probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing for America to survive.
I know for a fact, and you can't blame them, without the 10th anniversary, say 6 years ago, people in Idaho or wherever, they're not affected by that anymore. It's just like we're not affected by the bombing of Oklahoma. At the time, everybody is, rah, rah, rah. And as time goes by, when you're not directly affected, you kind of lose that momentum, and you just don't think about it, or you don't want to think about it. But when you live in this area, you think about it every day. Every day. I don't think there's been a day in 10 years that I haven't thought about it.
Certainly not forgotten, but there are generations who don't remember it the same way. I think for my generation, this group who was in college, this was our first major event. I mean, we kind of remember the Gulf War, but think about what came after, what was spawned by 9/11, which was 2 major wars, where it was our friends and brothers and family members going to fight that we had never experienced. The generation before us had not experienced since Vietnam, really.
I don't think they've forgotten. Maybe right now, no, because we constantly bring it up. We can't let America forget this. We can't, because we have our soldiers who are fighting to keep our freedom. I mean, you see how many soldiers now have come back, really post-traumatic stress disorder, they lose limbs, what have you. What were they fighting for? We would not be free and be able to walk around the way we do. And that's another thing. We have to let our children know and our children's children understand this. I mean, America is based on freedom. And we're not gonna, I certainly would not want that taken away from me.
And I believe as long as we continue to remember what really went, what really happened and what really went down, that's what's going to help every younger generation understand and fight for what's right.
When the families ask for help, America is there. So America has not forgotten. It's just been put in a place that helps protect America and allows us to move forward and drives our economy and drives our strive for freedom and justice. And those are all good things. I was upset shortly after September 11th when the Yankee game went on. I found it offensive. How could you be playing baseball when my friends are buried in the rubble? And that was a purely emotional response. But now looking back on it, that was a very good thing for America. And President Bush saw that, Mayor Giuliani saw that. They had that vision, I didn't have that. That playing America's favorite pastime was one of the best things that America could do. So I think that 9/11 not being in the forefront of everyone's mind is a good thing. But I do believe, and it has been demonstrated to us, that America will be there at our side when we ask them to be. And that's the very best thing that I could ask for.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Osama bin Laden is just one person. He is representative of networks of people who absolutely have made their cause to defeat the freedoms that we we understand, and we will not allow him to do so.
I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
We were absolutely joyous. We couldn't believe the news when we first heard it. We sat there kind of stunned because there was no prelude, there was nothing leading up to it. All of a sudden, boom, we came on, and then he sure enough comes out and he says that they had caught this guy and he was killed. And in a sense, there's an end to this saga. At least the head of the snake has been cut off.
Thousands of people were actually watching a baseball game last night between the New York Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies at Citizens Bank Field in Philadelphia. When the news started to spread, people started to check their BlackBerries and other communication devices, and then spontaneous applause and the chants of USA, USA, an emotional scene there in Philadelphia.
The only question for me, did it make the world safer? And I believe it did. Therefore, it was an act that I believe was appropriate. It was the right thing. The president did good. Because here was evil incarnate. If it made the world less safe, I would be against it. My only question is, what are we bequeathing to your children, to my grandchildren, to your grandchildren? What kind of a world are we making? And if killing Osama bin Laden made the world safer for them, and I think it did, I really believe it, that I think it made a strong message that this country is very determined, that it doesn't forget, and that if you strike us, be careful.
It is what it is. It happened, and it's over with. And now we have to go on. I mean, but there are going to be people like him that we have to watch out for.
And that doesn't mean al-Qaeda is finished and they're not going to retaliate. They definitely are going to retaliate. But the fact of the matter that the man who was behind this perpetuates this on us is just so wrong on so many levels. But that he was dead, and it was the Navy SEALs, and it was the military, and it was the U.S., and not one of the other NATO forces that got him. It was a great day. It was a great week, and as I told President Obama when we met him, I said, we need more cheers and less tears. And he said, oh, that's good. And I said, if you use that phrase, I'm gonna, so he laughed.
It was unbelievably exciting to know that we had finally gotten this guy. It was a time of celebration, but also we're brought back down to earth and realized that this war is far from over. It's a battle that my generation will be fighting our entire lives, and likely our children and grandchildren will too.
I never thought about that guy. I never thought about him. I wouldn't give him a minute. They do what they have to do, and I'm glad for everybody else, but I don't think twice about him. Death is too good for him.
I nearly fell off my chair. The killing of Osama bin Laden is the single greatest moment of justice that we've had in nearly 10 years. I don't even think the word stunned could describe the way I felt and the way I think most of the families felt at that moment. And I became, after I guess I got over being stunned, I became joyous and extremely proud of this country. And then the elation and joy quickly was wiped away by tears. Because you realize that none of this will bring back our friends and our loved ones. And the tears lasted for quite a while. I specifically remember talking with my friend Donnie Regan, who I was a firefighter with in Rescue 3. He was murdered on September 11th. I spoke with his daughter Jill, and she agreed with me because I wanted to gauge how all the families felt and if I was missing anything. And she said to me, I've felt the same way that you did, the mixed emotions and all. And she started crying and said, but I just want my dad back. And I think that would be true for all of us. We would much rather trade all this in for getting them back.
Time does not, for this tragedy, it doesn't diminish the pain. I have 5 grandchildren. I'm thankful. It's my blessing. I try to find the blessing in the day. But sometimes you got to fight for the blessing. There's a blessing in the day, but you got to fight for it. You got to make it. It's not just that time is going to make you better. You have to somehow, I love my wife, I love my children, I love my grandchildren, that's my blessing, and I'm going to save them. I'm not going to let this tragedy create more tragedy. There's a constant reminder, you can't get away from it. September 11 is not only inscribed in me, it's in anyone that lived at that time, was alive at that time, is going to have it forever. It's changed the course of history. The question is, how do we take all this evil and not allow it to dominate us and create more evil? That's the issue. What heals is helping other people in Todd's name and spirit.
Well, what time does is it helps you to cope better. It doesn't necessarily heal you, because for me, I will always have a hole in my heart that I lost somebody that I gave birth to. I will never ever be the same. I'm a different person now than I was prior to September 11th, but I cope better. And I know that when I have bouts of sorrow, and I still do, that will eventually pass. In the beginning, you don't know that passes.
Yeah, I feel better now than I did back then, of course, but it took a long time to get over it. Like when I saw somebody at a mall or anywhere that looked like one of my friends that were killed, it would freeze me for a second. I would just like get that feeling, and then I would move on. 10 years later, I don't get that feeling anymore. I think I've just learned to deal with everything and try to move on.
There are times certain triggers will get you. I mean, if you have to watch TV again and watch the buildings fall down, that's not going to make you too happy. I personally feel very sorry for the ones who could not find their people. That bothers me, and it bothers me when I have to watch TV on 9/11 and see them putting flowers down. I feel more for them than I feel for myself, because I know where I can go and pray and be where she is, and that's a consolation. I think if I had nothing to go to, I'd be similar to probably like those other people.
In Christopher's case, they found the body of a firefighter outside the Marriott Hotel by a fire truck. None of the other men from Engine 54 have ever been found. Christopher is the only firefighter that has ever been identified. For me, that was my miracle, because it allowed me then to begin to heal. I needed verification. Now, I'm sure that there are many of them that have put this to rest. I would not have been one of them.
The best thing that I can say to anyone in pain is to look beyond yourself. The best answer for pain is to help another person. And I can't tell you how strongly I feel that way, because it gives you a sense of, you know, your life is worthwhile. Life is precious. No, tomorrow is not promised to us. If we can just look around us and see beyond ourselves, you can wallow in the pain. And that's destructive. Or you can reach beyond yourself to another human being and make a difference.
Do the best you can. We'll get through it like we did, and we'll move on like we did. That was a lesson, because at that time, nobody thought we were going to get through this. I remember everybody putting up their condos for sale and everything. And I just think this country is way too strong, and the people are way too strong.
I would say keep your faith and your family and your friends close to you. And if you didn't have too many, then find a support group with the same situation. You have to have people to uplift you. You cannot be brought down. A lot of people do fall into depression because they don't have enough encouragement and people around them to love them, and that's what's very important.
There's so many cliches, there's so many things that could be said, but there is no greater calling than to help your fellow man.
There are some things that you have absolutely no control over, that you don't expect, that you don't anticipate, and the way you deal with those things is what measures you as a human being. And deciding that you're going to see goodness out of a horrific event gives you great solace and great peace.
There are different heroes in different situations. There are different people that deserve that label. But I don't know of a more fitting label or title for those guys that were running up the stairs than hero. I am honored by them. I am humbled by them. And I hope that we never forget their sacrifice.
To me, what makes a hero is somebody that is scared and still does it, and still gets it done. He doesn't complain, he gets it done no matter what. He's scared, and he still can pull it together enough to get something done.
It's doing anything to help people where whatever happens to you is not important. It's regardless of how you're going to be affected, and actively taking that role.
Any person that went there to help, the firemen, the police officers, the EMS workers, I mean, it's like you're giving yourself up for another human being when you do this, let's face it. And I just found it amazing. And I don't know what else they could have done. I mean, they went the 9 yards, if not even more.
These guys were heroes, there's no doubt about it. It's the same thing with, a guy in the military who's, under fire and goes out of his way to save somebody, and these are heroes, and that's what the firefighters were. They were in those buildings. They knew what they were going into, not knowing how bad it got, once they went into the building, and then the next breath, the buildings came down around them. These were true heroes.
But we forget the DC firefighters, the police, the Pentagon. The Pentagon is like its own city. Their firefighting department, their first responders, the guys out in Pennsylvania, and everyone around the country. This surge in people joining these kind of departments was unbelievable to watch too. People joining the police department, volunteer firefighters, joining the military, when you knew that we were marching towards war. There was no question that if you joined the military right after 9/11, we were about to enter a conflict into a place that we didn't know a lot about.
Maura Smith, she was a female cop that died at the 13th precinct. Didn't know her, first I ever heard of her, but I remember looking at photos of her, and every single time you saw a photo of her, she was helping somebody else out of the building. There had to be dozens of people that she helped out of the building, kept on going back in and getting somebody else going back in until finally, when the building came down, she ran out of time. And I'll never forget her, even though I'd never met her. And that's why I think Maura Smith was a hero. Because I know how scared everybody was. And she put herself last. And I know Mike Curtin, the sergeant that was killed, he was getting everybody out of that building. And I can just picture him standing there until he knows that his whole team is out. And I think he was the last one standing when that building came down. That's a hero to me. He could have ran.
For someone like Captain Terry Hatton to say to me, "I love you, brother, I may never see you again," and then go up the stairs. Where do you find men like that?